a king's crown. We've always assumed it was the ultimate symbol of dominance, proof that one man stood above all others. But what if the research we're discussing today is right, and a crown was actually a document, a written record of every counsel the king was legally obligated to obey? Welcome to Co-Pilot Podcasts. Today we're exploring a body of research called Kingdoms Not Tribes. Specifically, we're going to unpack what iconographic writing actually is, why the archaic world was far more constitutionally sophisticated than we've ever been taught, and what the distinction between celestial and terrestrial nobility tells us about how power was really organised across tens of thousands of years of human history. I'm joined by someone who's spent considerable time inside this research, and I want to start right at the beginning, because the author, who publishes as an unknown soldier, is making a claim that is, frankly, staggering.
It really is. And I think the reason it lands so hard is that it doesn't just challenge one assumption, it inverts the entire framework through which we've understood ancient governance. The research proposes that what we've been calling tribal art, cave painting, megalithic carving, ceremonial regalia, none of it is art in the decorative sense. It is a writing system, a visual writing system with consistent rules of syntax used on every continent except Antarctica and confirmed by radiocarbon dating as far back as 75,000 BC.
75,000 BC. That's not a typo.
Not a typo. The author calls the period between the Toba eruption of around 80,000 BC and approximately 1,800 BC the archaic world. And within that archaic world, this iconographic writing system was the dominant information technology of every realm. The author is very deliberate about that word, realm. Not tribe, not clan, realm.
And that distinction, kingdoms, not tribes, is really the thesis of the whole research, isn't it?
Exactly. The author argues that the compositions being deciphered are not decorative, not religious in the way we'd use that word casually. They are constitutional documents. Each composition records the structure and function of a realm, its leadership nodes, its institutional hierarchy, its geographic boundaries. The research describes them as, and I'm drawing directly from the text here, a representative census of the principal leadership nodes and institutions which comprised a realm.
So when someone carved a pattern into a megalith in Wales in 3,500 BC, they weren't decorating a stone, they were writing a constitution.
That is precisely what the research concludes. The author's discovery actually began with the Bryn Celyn pattern stone in the National Museum of Wales, a megalith buried beneath a mound on the Isle of Anglesey, discovered in 1929, radiocarbon dated to 3,500 BC. And what the author found after more than 200 pages of analysis was that the patterns on that stone were not ornamental. They were compositional. They followed rules.
What kind of rules are we talking about?
The research lays out three foundational rules of compositional syntax. Rule 1, the constitution had to look like the realm it documented, meaning the borders and general details were based on cartography. Rule 2, the king had to look like the kingdom, which is why archaic rulers wore those extraordinary headdresses. And Rule 3, every station of the nobility had to be represented by icons within the boundary of the realm, almost always in geophysical relationship to each other. So the composition is simultaneously a map, a census, and a constitutional record.
That's a lot to take in. The headdress thing alone is remarkable. The king literally wore the kingdom on his head.
And the crown specifically, the research is very clear on this. Every prominence on a king's crown represents an elder council to which the king was deferential. The research states, and I want to be precise here, that in all cases of kings wearing crowns, the constituent elements of the headdress document elder councils advising the king or queen. So a crown with 5 prominences documents a sovereign who reigned on the advice of 5 elder councils. That's not a symbol of absolute power. That's a written record of constitutional constraint.
Which brings us to something I find genuinely counterintuitive about this research, the idea that absolute monarchy was actually anathema in the archaic world. The research uses that word specifically.
It does. And that's one of the most striking claims in the entire body of work. The author writes that while we cannot mistake archaic forms of government as anything other than monarchies, absolute monarchy was anathema in every realm of the archaic world. The king reigned, but the nobility ruled, meaning kings served as the iconographic sun at the center, while the ruling nobility around them served as judges and arbiters of matters in dispute.
So let's get into the structure of that nobility, because this is where the iconographic order of precedence becomes really important. Walk me through it.
Right. So the research identifies 5 categories of terrestrial iconography, and they appear in a very specific order of precedence: floral, avian, aquatic, phonal, and finally anthropomorphic. And the sequence is not arbitrary, it reflects the order in which institutions were established within a realm before a king ever existed.
So floral comes first. What does floral iconography represent institutionally?
Floral iconography, grasses, trees, leaves, seeds, flowers, fruit, represents the foundational kindred courts of a realm. The research gives a remarkable example from Mayan iconography, a composition documenting the census of a complete kingdom, where a tree's leaves each feature 3 nodes, and the king is found straddling the trunk. The tree metaphor for a kingdom, the author notes, appears identically in Arabian wisdom cited by Christ in the 1st century. The kingdom of God like a tree beneath which mankind dwells, in whose branches a bird makes a nest. The same graphical metaphor, the author says, was being used in Arabia and in the Americas.
That's one of those moments where you have to stop and just sit with it for a second.
It is. And then avian iconography follows, all flighted creatures, including winged insects. The research argues that avian iconography is the dominant form of celestial creature in the record because eggs provided a critical source of nutrition in every season, in every region. Eggs were considered a celestial food, and the avian category bridges the terrestrial and celestial domains in a way no other category does.
And aquatic comes third.
Aquatic, all swimming creatures, including snakes and eels, which the research argues were universally employed to represent rivers. The author makes a fascinating point here. Serpentine iconography and its association with conflict or evil is found on every continent. And the argument is that this is because rivers were represented as snakes, and rivers caused conflict when they shifted course during flood events, redrawing the boundaries between kindred territories.
Which reframes the snake as a symbol of evil in a completely different way. It's not moral, it's geographic.
Precisely. And then faunal iconography, land-dwelling creatures, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, represents the terrestrial kindred courts. And finally, anthropomorphic iconography, human figures and chimeric figures that fuse human and animal forms. And this is the critical point the research makes about the order of precedence. Anthropomorphic iconography denotes ruling sovereigns. Its appearance in the iconographic record of any realm marks the point in history where that dominion achieved kingdom status.
So the king comes last, not first.
The king comes last. What is consistent across most realms, the research states, is that all subordinate stations of the terrestrial nobility were formed before the first king acceded to the throne. The institutions existed before the sovereign. The realm was built, and then a king was chosen to serve it. That is a complete inversion of the modern conquer and command presumption of ancient monarchy.
I want to push on that because it sounds almost too tidy. How was the king chosen, if not by conquest?
The research addresses this directly. It describes a democratic component at the inception of a dynasty, the example given is Ireland, but it was the realm council that voted, not the kindred in common. And in Ireland, unanimity in the realm council was required before a new royal lineage could be anointed and crowned. That was the one and only time a vote was taken. Once established, a royal line was believed to be sustained by the will of God. The author calls this system a royal republic, a constitutional form of government with faith forming its central binding thread.
A royal republic. That's a phrase that deserves to sit in the air for a moment.
It does, and the research argues this form of government sustained mankind from approximately 79,000 BC until around 1,500 BC. That's an extraordinary span of time for any system of governance to remain operative.
Now, the research draws a distinction between 2 castes of nobility, celestial and terrestrial, and I think this is where the episode's central thesis really crystallizes. Can you unpack that?
Yes, so the celestial nobility are the hereditary stations. The sovereign father and mother, the crown prince, the planetary peerage of princes who served as the sovereign's proxies throughout the realm. These stations were inherited from one's father and mother, and because they were inherited, they were regarded as celestial, as eternal. The sun and moon always identify the sovereign father and mother of a realm, while the planets always identified princes who served as the sovereign's proxies to kindred courts located throughout the realm.
And the planets literally wandered. That's where the word comes from.
Exactly. The research notes that in ancient Greek, the word planet literally means wanderers. And in ancient Aramaic, the language spoken by Abraham, the word was Hebrew. The princes wandered the realm conducting the sovereign's business, conveying news and petitions back to the center. The research describes it beautifully. The sun remains at center while the planets wander about the realm. In modern European terms, the research says planets would be considered dukes and duchesses.
So the celestial nobility is hereditary and eternal. What about the terrestrial nobility?
The terrestrial nobility were all originally appointed or elected by the celestial nobility. And crucially, the honors and titles acquired by the terrestrial nobility were not passed on to their children. Their station died with them. They were regarded as mortal, not eternal. And the research points out that this system is still reflected today in the distinction between the Lords Spiritual and Lords Temporal in the modern British House of Lords. One body conservative and deemed wiser, the other more progressive and more impulsive. The democratic corollary, the research argues, is found in the United States Senate and House of Representatives.
That's a remarkable through line, from archaic realms to Westminster to Capitol Hill.
And the research frames it as a universal principle, the need to elevate the wise and suppress the impulsive. Every system, the author argues, is predicated on that tension. One deliberative body was conservative and hence deemed wiser, while the other was more progressive and hence more impulsive.
Now, the compositional tool the research uses to document all of this is what the author calls the Mogan. Can you explain what a Mogan actually is?
A Mogan, the author borrows the term from Aramaic, where it's been translated in Greek as logos, meaning word or image with complete meaning, is essentially a solar graph, a solar disk at the center, with an array of elements distributed on its periphery. And the research argues these elements are not sun rays. They are representations of planetary orbits around the sun, and by extension, representations of the political jurisdictions of a realm.
So a Mogan is simultaneously an astronomical diagram and a political map.
That's exactly right. The research defines a Mogan 4, for example, as a solar disk with 3 ellipses equally distributed on its periphery, documenting an age when a realm was composed of a sovereign and 3 kingdoms. The author calls these 3 deferential kingdoms the founding triad, and notes that tripartite governing councils form a base metric in most, if not all, kindred iconography. A Mogan 7th, a solar disk with 6 elements, documents the realm after it has grown beyond the founding triad, with the body politic extended into 2 principalities, each composed of 3 kingdoms.
And the research notes that Mogan 7ths are the most ubiquitous form in the archaic iconographic record.
The most ubiquitous, yes. And what's striking is that the research documents periods where realms diverged from the triad, added constituents outside the modular system, and those periods, the author notes, ominously coincide with social strife and armed conflict. The triad wasn't just an aesthetic preference. It appears to have been a structural principle that kept realms stable.
There's something almost engineering-like about that, a modular system that scales without losing its internal logic.
The research uses almost exactly that language. To cope with population growth, archaic realms extended the ruling nobility in a modular way, preserving the triad in every extension and assuring balance in polity on all sides of the socio-political equation. It's a remarkably sophisticated constitutional design.
I want to bring in the geographic dimension here because the research makes a claim that I think a lot of listeners will find either thrilling or deeply skeptical making, that this iconographic system was genuinely global, not just widespread, global.
The author is unambiguous about this. The research states the iconographic record was in use in every corner of all continents except Antarctica, and the examples given span from Mayan iconography in Central America to Aboriginal cave paintings in Australia, from pre-Roman Britain to dynastic Egypt, from Hindu iconography in India to the regalia of Arabian nobility. The author found the same graphical metaphor for a kingdom, the tree, being employed in Arabia and in the Americas simultaneously.
And the Australian example is particularly striking, isn't it? The cave painting with the sovereign father and mother.
It is. The research describes a cave ceiling painting, figures painted in animal fat infused with ochre and chalk, which, when deconstructed, reveals 4 humanoid figures and 8 aquatic figures, totaling 12. The sovereign father is identified as the larger figure on the left with a solar headdress, and the sovereign mother on the right with a lunar tiara. In a deferential position relative to the sovereign mother are a crown prince and princess. The research concludes this documents a realm court convened to serve a vocational peerage of mariner kindreds, with the royal family present either in person or by proxy.
And the hand stencils, those are everywhere in Australian rock art. The research has a reading of those too.
A fascinating one. The research argues that the human hand, traced in the way found throughout the ancient world, is a Mogan sixth, a composition documenting the ruling nobility composed of the 5 visible planets plus their king at center. 5 fingers, 5 wanderers. The research connects this to devotional dance traditions in India, where the hands and fingers of dancers are painted in elder royal red, with solar discs on the palms, and argues that the king in ceremonial regalia was, in the author's words, a living, breathing constitution.
A living constitution. That's an extraordinary image.
Each arm and leg represented a principality. Each foot and hand represented that principality's king. Each finger and toe represented a planet serving that principality's king. The body itself was a map of the realm. And the research extends this to the face, the eyes, nose, and mouth of a sovereign's ceremonial face, representing retrograde ellipses of planets, making the planetary reference complete when the ears are added.
Now, the research also makes a point about the bicameral nature of archaic governance, the male and female domains, and I think this is one of the more unexpected dimensions of the thesis.
It is. The research argues that archaic realms featured what it calls a bicameral legislature and bicameral executive, composed not of conservative and liberal factions, but of the organic duality of human society, male and female. The sovereign mother led the nobility serving in the female domain, ensuring that issues exclusive to or best attended to by women were decided by women. The research frames this as a house of men and a house of women, and notes that the iconographic evidence for this is found in ecliptic iconography, the eclipse being the moment when the male and female domains act in concert.
The eclipse as a constitutional moment. That's a genuinely novel way to read celestial events.
And the research takes it further, arguing that the wedding ring is the most powerful and unifying symbol from archaic realms still in use today. The stone in a woman's ring documents a penumbral eclipse, the moment at which the sun pokes around the edge of the moon. Billions of people are wearing ecliptic iconography on their hands right now without knowing it.
Right, and that connects to the broader point the research makes about how much of this iconography is still embedded in daily life, in religious traditions, in regalia, in architecture, without anyone recognizing what it actually is.
That's one of the most urgent arguments in the research. The author writes that indigenous art, as it's being revealed in this series, is language. Color was a critical element in that language. And the author implores the elders of every indigenous community to resist the post-war impulse to regard indigenous art as art, because changing the dyes used to color traditional regalia, for example, destroys the composition intended by ancestors. The research treats this as a matter of cultural preservation with genuine stakes.
Let's talk about color, because the research has a specific framework for how color functioned in the writing system.
The research proposes that color functioned in the iconographic lexicon much as adjectives do in modern language. Linear forms define the proper nouns, their position relative to each other defines their order of deference, and color reveals qualitative properties of each noun. The 3 axiomatic solar colors are red, yellow, and orange. Red for the elder or dawn sun, yellow for the reigning or midday sun, and orange for the debutante or setting sun. These colors were applied to royal regalia across realms from the British Isles to the Amazon basin.
And the research notes that ancient realms recognized and accommodated not just the female domain, but also a domain of youth, what it calls the debutante institutions.
Yes, the research describes these as institutions within which the youth of the nation applied skills, became acclimated with the protocols of leadership, and provided their input on matters of the day. The modern equivalents, the author suggests, would be high schools and universities. The next generation of leadership had a formal, recognized place in the constitutional structure of archaic realms.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, the days of the week, because the research makes a point about this that I think is easy to miss.
The research observes that the days of the week are named in an order of precedence established tens of thousands of years before Christ. This may not be apparent to English speakers, who have substituted Norse equivalents for Roman gods, but the Latin nomenclature preserves the original order of celestial nobility. And the author is emphatic: do not mistake this order of precedence as trivia, or you will never be able to interpret archaic iconography. Because the movement of the moon and planets relative to the sun occurred at predictable intervals, the celestial dance determined the periodicity of governance, the entire social calendar of archaic realms.
So Monday through Sunday isn't just a calendar convention. It's a constitutional document hiding in plain sight.
That's exactly the kind of reframing the research invites. And it extends to architecture as well. The research notes that the major temple complexes of the Maya were not singular structures, but temples within temples within temples, the most sophisticated example featuring 7 structures nested around the first. The author calls this containership and identifies it as a rule of compositional syntax found everywhere from the British Isles to the Amazon basin. The Mayan took containership to unprecedented levels.
And the chess connection, I know the research flags this as a topic for a separate essay, but it's worth touching on.
The research describes chess as the game of kings and says it was used to teach princes how to govern a realm of peers in the archaic world. The author promises a full essay on it, but the spoiler offered is this. Just like real living couples could have offspring, so too could all iconographic forms of life. The pieces on a chessboard in archaic logic represent the stations of the nobility, and the game itself is a simulation of governance. The experience, the author writes, will enlighten you on the realities of governing a realm of peers.
Now, the research is careful to frame all of this as a prospective analysis, not a conclusive statement. The author is explicit that this is a first interpretation of the iconographic record, not the final word.
Very explicit. The author writes that the scope of this discovery is so massive that it requires the dedicated efforts of a generation to complete. In the British Isles alone, there are over 3 million artifacts in the national collections of England, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. The author calculates that at 5 minutes per artifact, it would take 150 years just to complete a first pass. And that's one region. The research is a beginning, not an ending.
And the author invites participation, actively encourages readers to begin identifying iconographic compositions in their own regions.
The recommendation given is to select a major river anywhere in the world, begin at its delta, and research the archaeology of that region. The author asserts that at the first major fork on every river, just above the point where salt water becomes fresh water, a royal court will be found, and halfway between that fork and the headwaters, a major population center, which will have been a king's court in the archaic. It's an invitation to citizen scholarship on a genuinely global scale.
So, when you step back from everything we've covered today, the iconographic writing system, the order of precedence, the celestial and terrestrial nobility, the royal republic, the Mogan, what's the single most important thing this research is asking us to reconsider?
I think it's the timeline of constitutional sophistication. The research is arguing that structured, representative, constitutionally constrained governance is not a product of the Enlightenment, or of classical antiquity, or even of the Bronze Age. It is tens of thousands of years old. The assumption that our most remote ancestors were groveling for tubers, the author uses that phrase directly, is not just wrong. It is, the research suggests, a failure of imagination on the part of modern academia.
And the evidence isn't in texts that can be disputed or mistranslated. It's in stone, in cave ceilings, in the regalia of living traditions.
In hundreds of millions of artifacts sitting in museum collections around the world, waiting to be read rather than admired. The research makes the point that once you understand the writing system, you cannot unsee it. The compositions are everywhere. The question is whether we're willing to read them.
And the implications for how we understand modern governance are real, aren't they? The lords spiritual and lords temporal, the Senate and the House. These aren't inventions, they're echoes.
Echoes of a system the research argues was operative for roughly 77,000 years. The tension between the conservative and the progressive, the hereditary and the appointed, the wise elder and the ambitious newcomer, these are not modern political inventions. They are, if the research is correct, the foundational architecture of human governance. We didn't design these structures. We remembered them.
Here's what this really comes down to, I think. The research by an unknown soldier isn't just proposing a new reading of ancient artifacts. It's proposing a new reading of human nature. That the impulse to build structured, accountable, constitutionally constrained communities is not a late development in our story. It is the story. From the first Mogan carved into stone to the crown on a king's head, to the ring on a bride's finger, the same constitutional logic has been running underneath human civilization for longer than we've been willing to admit.
And the terrestrial nobility, those appointed, mortal, non-hereditary stations, are the key to understanding why. They were the mechanism by which realms remained accountable. Their titles died with them. Their authority was delegated, not inherited. And the king, who came last in the order of precedence, was not the origin of the realm's structure. He was its servant. The institutions existed before him, and they were designed to outlast him.
Which means the crown was never really about power over others. It was always a list of people you had to listen to. And if that's true, if the research holds, then every institution of power we've built since the archaic world has been, at some level, a variation on that same ancient argument: who gets to be in the room and who has to answer to whom.
And the iconographic record, if the author is right, has been trying to tell us the answer for 75,000 years. We just forgot how to read it.
That's a thought worth sitting with. The research is published under the name An Unknown Soldier, and the author describes it as a first interpretation, an opening of a conversation that will take generations to complete. If you want to go deeper, the source material is called A First Interpretation of Archaic History, and the video essay series that accompanies it is where the iconographic examples are laid out in full.